mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this IT governance webinar on the New York State cybersecurity regulation, how to gain certification within timelines. My name is Alan Calder. I'm the Chief Executive and founder of IT Governance, and I'm going to be your host for this afternoon. You will have noted that you're all muted when you came into the webinar. That's because we've discovered that background noise can be very off-putting for other delegates and attendees on the webinar. As I go through the presentation, you'll find that you have questions that you want to ask. Please don't lose them. In fact, the best thing for you to do is to use the chat function or the question function, which you see in the panel of go-to webinars tools, which are probably sitting on the right-hand side of your screen. Do type questions into that. I will make sure that I pick them up once we come to the end of the webinar. I'll go through whatever questions there are and answer those. I'll read your question out to people on the webinar, and I'll then share the answer with everybody. So do feel free. Any questions you've got, I'm up for them. I like questions. They're the highlight of webinars. As I said, I'm the founder of IT Governance. I set the business up some 10 years ago because I came to the conclusion that for organizations to implement effective cybersecurity regulations, it would require board commitment and drive from the chief executive, that it would always be a real challenge for officers of the company and the heads of IT security to make cybersecurity work effectively inside the organization without proper top management buy-in. And I wanted to create and lead a company which was focused on making that happen. At the time, I never imagined that we would have reached a point where cybersecurity was in the headlines and on social media virtually every single day, and that states and nations would be passing laws mandating organizations to address cybersecurity. But that's really what's happened, and my book, IT Governance, an International Guide to Data Security and the International Standard ISO 27001, is now in its 6th edition. It's become the Open University postgraduate textbook for their information security management program. We as an organization are a global provider of cybersecurity or data security products, services and solutions. Our whole approach to the market is to be a one-stop shop provider of excellence. Most of the products and services that we offer are originated through our own experience working with clients of all sizes and in all sectors around the world, tackling cybersecurity, tackling compliance with international standards, meeting regulatory and legal obligations, regulatory, statutory, contractual, legal obligations, and looking to find some method of providing assurance to customers as well as to regulators and in courts of law that they've taken an appropriate and measured approach to cybersecurity. So we've now worked with probably 450 organizations to achieve ISO 27001 from West Coast United States all the way through to East Coast Australia. We deliver large parts of our training and consultancy online, which means that we save our clients the costs of consultants traveling and wasting time on site. We can deliver focused, practical, to-the-point solutions. And as I said, our focus very much on enabling organizations to draw on our expertise around protection, compliance and thriving. And so we deliver services that cover the broad range of cyber resilience products and services, information security, disaster recovery, PCI DSS compliance, security and penetration testing, data protection, and of course on the other side of the field we deal a lot with IT governance, so COBIT 5, project management methodologies, ITIL and IT service management, all part of our broader offering to our clients. What that means is that where our clients need a solution, we can put an appropriately shaped peg into the hole. We're not somebody for whom the answer is always by consultancy or by training. The answer is by whatever is appropriate to help you tackle your compliance needs. And very much the challenge for organizations in New York State right now is that compliance needs have shifted up a notch in terms of cybersecurity, away from requirements simply to protect assets of the organization to comply with specific cybersecurity regulation. ISO 27001 is an international standard which talks very directly to the requirements of the New York regulation, and so I'm going to be talking today about the effect on businesses of having to comply with the regulation and the transition timelines to demonstrate compliance. I'm going to talk a bit about how ISO 27001, the international standard, can help achieve those, because it's a body of established knowledge. I'll look a little bit at what's involved in and how to use ISO 27001. We'll talk then about the conducting of a gap analysis, the mandatory first step for compliance, to determine the technical and organizational measures that your organization has to adopt to comply with the regulation. We'll touch on policies and procedures that comply with the regulation, and then of course the additions to your cybersecurity program and policy, including personnel and the incident response plan that you need to have in place to meet a 180-day deadline for compliance. So the background, of course, to the NYDFS cybersecurity requirements is that financial services companies are under sustained cyber attack. The regulation calls for New York financial institutions to put in place appropriate security measures to protect themselves against cyber attacks, and recognizes the essential role that financial service organizations play, not just in the economy of New York, but of course in the United States as a whole, and their contribution to the global economy. And the reality that cyber criminals can sit wherever they like in the world, mount attacks that are both automated and effective at a distance to overcome weak or inadequate cybersecurity defenses in some financial services organizations has inevitably meant that regulators have assumed that it's necessary to put in place regulations that cover all organizations in the sector. And cyber threats to the financial industry are on the increase. They're simply getting more and more and more, and apart from the Identity Theft Resource Center, which is identified here, revealed that in 2016 financial organizations suffered a significant number of direct breaches, with customer records being compromised in significant numbers, and that's simply around identity theft. Many of you will be aware of the attack on the SWIFT processing capability. So SWIFT, the cornerstone of moving money around amongst financial institutions and banks internationally, very successfully attacked by cyber criminals. That was Bangladesh in particular, focused on Bangladesh's implementation and link into the SWIFT payment system. $81 million stolen in that specific attack, which was mounted using a very old-fashioned attack vector called malware. Cyber criminals were interrupted in their attempt to transfer some $951 additional from the Bangladeshi central bank account in the New York Federal Reserve to their own accounts, and so that means that while cybersecurity professionals were able to react quickly, it was not quickly enough. A breach like this really should never have happened. And when you look at the financial sector as a whole, and this is a report drawing on the number of companies that experienced data breaches in the period between June 2015 and April 2016, you can see that financial services as an industry are very close to the top. Only healthcare is significantly ahead of the financial services sector in terms of the number of breaches that the sector suffered. So financial services organizations accounted for over 10% of the total breaches across the whole of the world in that period. And that means that financial services organizations need to turn to and pay very careful attention to their own cybersecurity situation. There are good reasons to do that. Compliance with cybersecurity regulations, putting in place adequate cybersecurity protection is not just a good idea, because it protects the reputation of the institution. Increasingly, consumers want to avoid dealing with institutions that are breached. They want to stay away from any organization anywhere in the financial sector that is unable to demonstrate that it can protect personal information adequately. And so under the financial services law, the New York District Superintendent has the authority to apply civil penalties where organizations are in breach of the requirements and impose fines for non-compliance or for false reporting. So there is the potential for civil penalties. Of course, there is the potential for class action suits. There's the potential for state attorney prosecutions. All of them arising out of failure to observe the regulatory requirement around cybersecurity. Earlier on this year, the NYDFS fined Deutsche Bank $425 million for violating anti-money laundering laws that involved inadequate precautions around compliance. That included under-resourced staffing, weak risk assessments, and inaccurate and insufficient documentation. It's our view that globally organizations are only just beginning to experience the wrath, if you like, of regulators, of attorneys, of attorney generals, of state prosecutors, of organizations, law enforcement agencies around personal data, because the reality is that it's very easy for cyber criminals to steal personal data, and when they steal data it's usually in very substantial quantities, and that causes significant distress to the individuals concerned, distress which can take them months and years to iron out. And that means that the tide of regulation and the tide of actions being taken against organizations that fail to meet regulatory requirements is only going to increase. And it's worth just stopping to take a look at the threat landscape. The reality for a financial sector organization, like any other organization, is that the threat actors, the people who are looking to steal assets, cover a very broad range of people and entities. There are what we call non-target specific attackers, the folk who are simply sending out software which is designed to identify vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities in operating systems, in hardware, in websites, in applications, and having identified a vulnerability to mount a pre-planned software attack. So non-target specific, simply pursuing and attacking vulnerabilities. And something like 80% of all internet-borne attacks fall into that category of non-target specific, highly automated, usually highly successful attacks, because the reality is that most organizations simply fail to stay on top of patching regimes. Operating systems are not patched for latest vulnerabilities, and attackers can access and do know what the latest vulnerabilities are, because just like us, they have access to the same vulnerability databases which are set up and maintained by software vendors. So non-target specific. Alongside non-target specific attacks, we have terrorists, we have hacktivists, we have people who, pursuing their own particular set of goals and objectives, look to attack specific targets. Hacktivists break into organizations doing things they happen to disagree with. And there are lots of hacktivists who disagree with successful financial organizations and will break into a Goldman Sachs or any other organization simply to make a point. More concern, of course, is terrorism and the stated ambition of terrorists to blackmail, to steal information from, to disrupt the activity of organizations, particularly in the critical national infrastructures and financial sector. But it's particularly organized crime and nation states and competitors that one has to be concerned with. Where nation states and competitors are concerned, you're should be worried about the stealing of confidential information. You should be concerned about the extent to which those kinds of organizations are able to disrupt activities, to put sectors into positions from which they struggle to compete effectively, and nation states have very significant resources to be able to do that. Advanced persistent threat type attacks are usually orchestrated and resourced by nation-state type attackers. So nation-states, organized crime, every organized crime entity in the world now has an online crime capability. If you research the output from Interpol, from the FBI, from any one of the organized crime prevention agencies, you'll find that they've published significant data about the crime capability of serious organized crime rings. And they use online cybercrime capability not just to steal money and to steal information, but to use computers to mount distributed denial of service attacks on other organizations, to mount ransomware attacks, to use information to move illegal contraband cargoes, so smuggling modern slavery, smuggling drugs, all of those kinds of capabilities are in the hands of serious organized crime, and they use the computer systems and networks of legitimate organizations which are vulnerable but which are capable of being exploited to share data, to shift information, and to break the law. And of course, financial sector institutions who have the expectation of probity from their customers are just as much a target in this area as are any other institution. Attackers focus on a number of parts of the threat surface, if you like. The vector, the direction of attack is to exploit weaknesses in people, weaknesses in process, and weaknesses in technology. Cybersecurity regulation increasingly recognizes that simply requiring the deployment of cybersecurity technology is a wholly inadequate response to the threat. Frankly, if you don't have people who know how to configure technology and you don't have a process that determines what technology should be configured or by whom or by when, your technology won't deliver the level of security that you need. So attackers are attacking weaknesses in people, processes, and technology. You're all accustomed to phishing, farming, and other types of social engineering attacks, but taking advantage of weaknesses in compliance and approval processes is just as much of a target attack vector as is anything else. So threat types, driven, any one of those threat actors could be driving any one of the threat types: malware, web attacks, denial of service, social engineering, exploit kits, ransomware, and the list goes on and on and on. There are some 15 to 20 regularly used attack threat types which are deployed by attackers on a day-to-day basis, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. Threat targets, personally identifiable information, personal payment card data, intellectual property, money. Why steal payment card data if you can break into a bank account and steal money? And that's what we saw happening with the SWIFT attack. It was a very straightforward bank heist, stealing hard dollars. Reputation gets trashed in the process of being breached. Commercial information, negotiating positions, other information can get stolen, get sold to competitors. The range of things that an attacker can do once they've got inside your network is of course substantial. Bear in mind that most organizations, when they're breached, don't know what's going to be stolen. The attacker doesn't know what they're going to steal. They're breaking into the organization. They're going to steal what they can once they're inside the organization. There is a real cyber disconnect. Most organizations, in response to surveys today, say that cybersecurity is embedded in their organization, that their board is very aware of cybersecurity, that they're addressing cybersecurity, it's on the agenda all the time, and something like 70 to 80% of organizations admit in the same survey that their organization is subject to 100 plus attacks a year, that 2/3 of those attacks are successful. That means something like 2 to 3 attacks every single month are successful in breaching the defenses that the organization has in place, and where the median cost of that breach sits in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of damages when you take reputation damage into account. It really means that most organizations, when they claim to be cyber secure, really simply don't know what they're talking about. They really aren't. And the reason for the emergence of regulation is because boards have to move on from believing that they're secure to recognizing that they have to be able to demonstrate compliance with a specific set of regulations. And the requirements in New York became effective on the 1st of March. The reporting requirement kicks in on February the 15th next year. So we've got slightly less than 12 months to be able to demonstrate that you can report against all of the requirements. And there are a number of requirements which you have to be able to implement and demonstrate implementation more quickly. The first target is the 180-day requirement, so section 500.02, cybersecurity program in place, 500.03, a policy, a board-driven cybersecurity policy, 500.07, access privileges defined, 500.10, cybersecurity personnel and intelligence identified and in place, and 500.16, an incident response plan. So 180 days, you need to be able to demonstrate you've got the first key steps of a cybersecurity program in place. Having done that, you've got time to appoint a Chief Information Security Officer, 1 year to do that. So the balance after the first 180 days, not 180 days plus a year, it's 180 days less than a year, so the balance is what you've got. Penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, carry out a risk assessment, put in place multi-factor authentication, and make sure that your staff are subject to appropriate training and their behavior appropriately monitored. Within 18 months, you need to be able to demonstrate an effective audit trail with good application level security, limitations on data retention, so you're not retaining data for longer than legally you need to have it, training and monitoring extended further across the organization, and then encryption of non-public information safely in place by within 18 months. And then finally, within 2 years, your cybersecurity program needs to extend across third-party service providers. And that obviously includes service providers in the cloud. And from a cybersecurity point of view, while that's the timetable, the reality is you should be accelerating, you should be looking to get those in place significantly sooner than the regulation allows, because the reality is that cyber criminals are not going to wait. They're not sitting there saying, hey, let's not go break into these organizations' application level vulnerabilities until 19 months are past. Let's go get them now, because actually most organizations are not going to address application security for 18 months or so. So you can think of all of the compliance requirements which sit more than 180 days out as being the areas that attackers are going to target on the basis that you're not rushing to do anything about them. So that's the first key takeaway from this afternoon, is even though the regulation says you've got time, don't give yourself the time. Get on with getting compliance as fast as you can, because actually the real trick is not to be breached. So who has to comply? Well, the regulation says that all financial services based in New York, that's banking institutions, savings and loans, private bankers, trust companies, insurance agencies, health insurers, and check cashers. That's the scope of GDPR. Health insurers probably already dealing with HIPAA compliance, need to extend their coverage to meet the regulatory compliance. Any other financial institution that falls under the NYDFS supervision also has to comply, unless you can meet the exemption criteria, which is fewer than 10 employees, sales less than 5 million over the last 3 years, or less than 10 million in total assets. So relatively speaking, micro businesses are exempt, and then there are additional exemptions set out in other sections of the regulation which identify entities that don't handle, access, possess or own non-public information and that are potentially exempt. So if you think you're exempt, talk to your lawyers, your attorneys, and make sure that you are genuinely exempt and that you can deal with the requirements. So given that you're probably within scope, you need to comply, why turn to ISO 27001 or 27001 to be the basis of how you go about complying? The regulations don't tell you what you should do. They tell you what you have to be able to demonstrate you have done. So the best practice, how do you go about meeting those requirements, you either have to work out for yourself, or you can accelerate the process of finding out by turning to an international standard like ISO 27001. And ISO 27001 is an international standard just like ISO 9001, the quality management standard, or 14001, the environmental management standard. It's been developed over many years. It first appeared in its earliest guise in the very late 1990s. It's been adopted, developed and used around the world. It's been subject to a number of revisions and improvements, and the pace of implementation now is accelerating across the world. Last year the United States was the third fastest growing country in the world for implementation of ISO 27001 measured by organizations that are externally certified. One of the benefits of ISO 27001 is that you can have an external certification that demonstrates compliance, and an external certification is much less expensive than a SOC 2 compliance certification. So unless you have a client of your own that requires SOC 2 certification, you're looking for something that can satisfy your direct clients about the extent to which you've met cybersecurity requirements. ISO 27001 is a very effective method of doing that. It's got a very substantial global ecosystem of implementers and auditors. There are lots of people who know how to implement the standard who you can hire or get consultancy support from. There are books and tools, there are training courses, and all of that is much more easily available than, of course, is experience in implementing compliance to the New York regulation. So ISO 27001, which maps absolutely to the regulation. If you haven't already seen that, you can download from our website the green papers which map the clauses of ISO 27001 to the regulation. There is, as I said, a very substantial ecosystem of organizations that can help do it. And organizations like Citibank, AWS, IBM, Microsoft, the Federal Bank, the Federal Reserve of New York have all previously implemented ISO 27001 and continue to be certified to it. So it's a standard of some distinction, some reputation, and our own experience working with clients and with delivery entities in the United States is that it's increasingly seen as the obvious standard to be adopted by United States organizations. It's a standard that enables you to coordinate multiple legal and contractual compliance requirements. It focuses on the idea of confidentiality, integrity and availability of information, and therefore it enables organizations to map together all of the different requirements across multiple regulations and ensure that what they're doing is an appropriate set of activities in terms of meeting those compliance requirements. It's built around the idea of business-focused risk assessment, and it balances confidentiality, integrity and availability. So it recognizes that not all organizations will want to put in place exactly the same controls, and allows for that as a practical approach for organizations in terms of dealing with compliance. It's possible to become certified in a timely, cost-effective way. You can get on with seeking compliance. For most organizations, the timeline to compliance is between 3 and 9 months, so considerably inside the timeline that the regulation gives for demonstrating compliance. ISO 27001 as a standard in clauses 4 through 10 sets out the cornerstones of compliance, the things that an organization must do in terms of how to scope a management system, how to demonstrate that you have top management buy-in, how to ensure that you have an internal communications policy and plan with appropriate levels of competence and skills in cybersecurity personnel, looks at how the operations components of an organization should work, and looks at reporting, monitoring, reviewing and improving the management system. So that's all of the bits which you see in this slide on the left-hand side, clauses 4 through 10 of the management standard, set out what a cybersecurity program needs to look like. A cybersecurity program will typically, on the basis of a risk assessment and on the basis of minimum control requirements, adopt a set of controls, and ISO 27001 has a set of controls in Annex A which can map to any other set of controls, and many United States, US organizations, our clients, draw on, rather than the Annex A controls, they draw on the NIST special publication series of controls. Any control set can work effectively with ISO 27001. What 27001 does do, and it has a separate third standard, ISO 27000, which contains common definitions which are applicable across the whole family of standards. The controls that are listed in Annex A are simply the titles of all of the controls, the implementation and operation of which are described in a sister standard, ISO 27002. ISO 27002 sets out 114 different controls that organizations can implement to help them deal with cybersecurity, and those controls start with information security or cybersecurity policies, deal with human resources, cryptography, operation security, physical security, supplier relationships, incident management and compliance. And you can see just by looking at those control categories that they talk to the requirements of the New York regulation, all of the areas in which the New York regulation says you need to be implementing controls. ISO 27001 offers up not just a control but guidance on how best to implement that control in an organization. So ISO 27001 is a very practical resource for an organization to turn to. A cybersecurity program must be informed, says the regulation, by the results of a risk assessment, and the risk assessment has to determine the risks facing the organization, its information and information systems. In other words, the reality is that different financial sector organizations are likely to face different risks depending on the customer base you're dealing with, the environment within which you're operating, the types of assets, information that you're processing, and so an appropriate control framework for one organization will be inappropriate for another. And both ISO 27001 and the regulations say the starting point for selecting controls is an appropriate risk assessment program. So ISO 27001, how to do that. It also gives guidance on how to carry out an audit that enables you to report on the current state of technical and organizational measures that you have in place in line with the requirements of the regulations. So 27001 is very much the very best practice framework to enable an organization to put itself into the right place to meet the requirements of the regulation. One of the tools that you might use for cybersecurity risk assessment is a software risk assessment tool called VS Risk. It's now in a late version 2 product. It enables you to automate very substantially the process of risk assessment, and you can read about VS Risk on our on itgovernanceUSA.com. It enables you to set a compliance framework with a level of risk depending on your own risk appetite, so a relationship of acceptance criteria that respects your particular appetite for risk, which can then deal with the range of risks that you've got to have and give you a prioritized risk treatment plan linked to the controls that you've selected, and the controls can become from NIST, from PCI if you happen to process payment card data, from ISO 27001 as appropriate, and give you a list of controls which you can then get on with implementing. And a risk assessment tool like this for a multi-user environment should cost in the low thousands of dollars. So it's a very inexpensive best practice way for an organization to get on top of not simply doing a risk assessment for the first time, but putting yourself in place to do a repeated risk assessment, to review it, to make sure that it stays current, that you're updating it to deal with the emergence of new threats and vulnerabilities, and that you're able to continually demonstrate that your cybersecurity program is meeting compliance requirements. The requirement then under 500.3 is to put in place a policy, an information security policy, supported by a number of other very specific requirements. And ISO 27001, as you saw, helps address all of these requirements. So data governance and classification, asset inventory, managing devices, both physical and mobile, identity management and access controls, whether remote access or on-site access, business continuity and disaster recovery planning and the resources necessary to enable you to do that effectively, controls to deal with the operation of systems, their availability, uptime. 27001 can help with that. Network security, the notion of layered security, multi-layer, multi-depth security inside networks, ongoing system and network monitoring tailored to recognize the specific risks that as an organization you have to deal with. Of course, physical security and environmental controls, because it's not just cyber attackers you have to be concerned about, it's the risk of fire, flood, other terrorist activity which could disrupt the physical environment within which data processing is taking place. The respect for customer data privacy, as I said, if you're already dealing with HIPAA, you will have a very solid understanding of some of the issues around personal data privacy. GLBA is another regulation that intersects with the New York regulation. Vendor and third-party service provider management risk assessment is built into 27001, as is incident response. So it's a very comprehensive standard which contains in it all of the components that you need to be addressing, but rather than you having to work out how to address them yourself, 27001 enables you to draw on global best practice. And it's because it's a public standard, it's not a proprietary document. You don't have to belong to an organization to access it. You simply have to give the standards body of North America, which is the United States resale body or agent for the International Standards Organization, something like a couple of $100, maybe $150, I think it is, and you can have a copy of ISO 27001 and 27002. The regulation goes on to say that you have to appoint appropriate personnel. They have to have the right sets of skills and competences. You need to have an integrated approach, so you need a mix of skills around cybersecurity which address not just technical security but also process security, that you need awareness across the organization is appropriate for cybersecurity issues. If staff are unable to recognize a phishing email when it comes in through the network, or they're unable to recognize a social engineering attack through voice over IP or by telephone, then however good your technical controls are, you're still going to have a breach, you're still going to be dealing with all the consequences of a cyber breach. So you need to be looking for awareness programs, potentially online cybersecurity training where you can evidence the fact that staff have had appropriate training, qualifications like cybersecurity risk management practitioner qualifications, certificated information security, lead implementers, lead auditor, all of those are appropriate qualifications to have for those people who are going to lead the NYDFS compliance, cybersecurity compliance activity. And you need to have an incident response plan, and believe me, the reason why you need an incident response plan is that you're going to be breached. However good your controls are, you're going to be breached. The attackers usually are several steps ahead of the defenders, and that means that if you have worked out how, when you're breached, you're able to respond quickly both to shut down the breach and to protect the data which is being accessed, you can minimize very quickly the effect of the breach. And so working out the scenarios under which you might be breached, putting in place and testing response plans is a critical element of really effective cybersecurity, and therefore it's not surprising that it should be a requirement of the regulation. As I said, there are a number of resources which you can draw on, which as an organization we make available to you. They start with the freely available green papers which you can download, the mapped alignment with ISO 27001, and then a much broader introductory green paper. Part 1, you might know green papers, what we call green papers, is a white paper which looks at the regulation and how the regulation is supported by compliance to ISO 27001. On our website there's an information page, the 27001 NYDFS cybersecurity page, which has more information. It's updated on a fairly regular basis. We blog on our US website around cybersecurity, and when I say we as an organization, while we're in the United Kingdom at heart, we are in reality wherever our clients need us, and we have a very fast-growing presence in the United States, and particularly in New York, because of the prevalence of cybercrime. Risk assessment, you can read about risk assessment tools again on itgovernanceUSA.com and look at the risk assessment tool which we have there. And then there is the certificated online training, ISO 27001 Foundation Lead Implementer training, specifically built around compliance to the NYDFS cybersecurity regulation, a toolkit which has been developed to give you the set of documentation that enable you to work out very quickly what you need to put in place and to draw on a set of well-tested templates to get your documentation system in place quickly and effectively, the risk assessment software, and of course you can get copies of the standards off of our website just as easily as you can from the North American Standards Body website. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of what I was planning to say. So I think we may have run out of time. I think this has taken me slightly longer to talk through than we anticipated, but if you have questions, I'm going to open up for those of you who might want to raise questions through the chat function. Please do trigger me with any particular questions you've got that you'd like us to be addressing. So let me just go to questions. The first question is, would you be sending out copies of the presentation email, which amazingly is always the first question on every single webinar. Yes, we're sending it out. The team have already been telling you that. It's going out to everybody. The webinar, so one question around the cybersecurity regulation. If you are getting certification to 27001, does that absolve you of compliance to the regulation? To which the obvious answer is no, it doesn't, but it does demonstrate that when you say you've put in place an information or a cybersecurity program that meets the requirements of the international standard and of the regulation, but it's not just you claiming that you've done it. You do have the evidence from an external auditor carried out by an accredited certification body, which will be able to demonstrate to clients that you've taken appropriate steps to meet the requirements. And as I say, I recognize that we've flown slightly over time, so let me just take as a last question then the question about the value of ISO 27001 to financial sector organizations in terms of demonstrating cybersecurity to consumers. The question is, does it have any impact on consumers? And the practical answer is increasingly yes. It's a code of practice, it's a certification, it has 15 years of international pedigree, and increasingly consumers, and in particular those consumers who are aware of issues around cybersecurity, turn to standards like ISO 27001 for evidence that that an organization has looked after their security. And where ISO 27001 is concerned in the United States now, there are really two reasons for organizations to address it. One is to get ahead of your competitors. As I said, the US is the fastest growing market, the third fastest growing market in the world, and the second is because not only do you get ahead of your competitors, but you're able to demonstrate to clients that you've very cost effectively put in place a program of cybersecurity compliance. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the webinar with us today. If you can find anything useful on www.itgovernanceUSA.com, please do feel free to use any of our resources that are available there, and if there is any further information that we can help you with, please do take advantage of the various ways you can interact with us, and we'll do whatever we can to help. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a great day. Thanks very much for being with us.